You are listening to Resolving Reality Radio. Resolving Reality is an independent Irish media platform that examines national and global issues, featuring opinions and topics not covered in the mainstream media, including the alternative, the politically incorrect, the undiscovered, and the ignored. Visit the Resolving Reality website for articles, podcasts, and video content. resolvingreality.com.
Welcome to Resolving Reality. My name is Emmett, the creator of the resolvingreality.com website and host of this podcast, Resolving Reality Radio. Check out the website for all our social media links and platforms, which you can find in the footer on each page. Follow us on Twitter at ResolvingOr, both capital Rs. Find us on YouTube, where you can listen to the podcasts, but also watch our video content. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We are on Mixcloud, but if you prefer to listen to the podcast in higher quality WAV audio, click on the SoundCloud icon to visit the Resolving Reality SoundCloud profile, where you can download the episodes in high quality as well. Resolving Reality Radio is now on Stitcher and iTunes, plus check out our BitChute profile and you will find all those links right there on the website, resolvingreality.com.
Keep listening to Resolving Reality Radio.
In this episode, I examine the very disturbing subjects of child predation, procurement, abuse and trafficking with Jon Wedger, a former Scotland Yard CID detective and London Metropolitan police officer with over 25 years' experience in this area. We discuss how serious the problem of child abuse is, how the powers that be have been trying to suppress the truth, and how whistleblowers like Jon have been treated for speaking out about this issue. Visit Jon's website, jonwedgerfoundation.org, for more information, interviews, and social media profiles, including Jon's YouTube channel, and links for those will be in the interview description. Stay tuned and keep listening to Resolving Reality Radio. Hello, Jon Wedger. Good to speak to you and welcome to Resolving Reality Radio.
It's a pleasure.
Great. Thanks, Jon. Thank you for agreeing to do the interview. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I've been aware of you for a while now and the work that you've been doing over in the UK, exposing, crimes against children and the trafficking and also the treatment you've been dealing with from the establishment. But of course, first of all, we need to start with a slight, an introduction to you and your career with the police. So, tell us what roles you had within the police and where were you mostly based?
Well, I joined in the early 90s. I initially, like all coppers back then, started off as a uniformed constable. I started off in southeast London. I then moved to the West End. It's there where I moved into the CID very early in my career. And then from there, I become a detective, and then I sort of progressed via various specialist units, and I sort of made my speciality sort of vice and child abuse investigations.
Oh, I see. Okay. And, was it always part of the plan for you to be a detective and work in the CID? Like, were you ambitious to start off with?
Yeah. I mean, I had sort of delusions of grandeur. I thought I'd end up as commissioner, and it didn't work out. I never sort of got promoted, although they say it's not promotion, but becoming a detective is very difficult. You have to take a very, very stringent exam, and then from there you have to have sort of a proven track record of your investigative abilities. So I'm an individual. I'm very much a loner as well. I didn't enjoy uniform police work. I don't like the group mentality, and I always wanted to become a detective because detectives, there's a lot more freedom. The uniform work tends to be very regimented and almost military-like, whereas detective, you're a bit more of a free spirit, which really appealed to me. But when it comes to child abuse investigations, no way did I ever think I would end up in that role at all.
Right. And what kind of attributes did you have that kind of got you noticed and promoted? Was it professionalism or getting results? Like what was it that made you stand out?
Well, I was always a thorn in their side, really. I sort of struggled with discipline from very, very early on. That was highlighted in my basic training. where they tried to sort of backclass me for attitude. And one of the criticisms was that I smiled too much, so that was seen as a black mark. I mean, I don't want to sound in the least conceited, but I never struggled with any of the work. I found investigating very easy. There's a lot of common sense, and the best investigators are the best communicators. Now, if you can communicate, which is just a natural gift I've got, is one to communicate. I've got a very non-judgmental sort of air to me, and that sort of unlocks so many doors. And once I realised that's all it took is to approach people was really sort of not just on their level, but sometimes I'd approach them from beneath their level. Whereas a lot of coppers, they always take the higher ground. And it's this parent-teacher sort of mentality. They've always got to be in charge. And it sort of doesn't bode well when you want information. And policing works on information. And you can get it from many sources, but the best way is from the people in the know. And I was very good at getting information from people, not in a sneaky way, but, in the right way. And I just found police work, for me as a natural communicator, very, very easy. But that then caused a lot of problems because there was a lot of jealousy, and policing is a very ego-driven career, a very macho career. And when you sort of leapfrog in your results by doing it the way I did it, working very much on my own or in a small group, and just really basically talking to people the right way and being nice to them, I was getting results really far beyond my years, and it caused a lot of resentment. And it didn't go down too well, but I found it very easy. And when it comes to sort of dealing with the kids, I was a single parent, very early on in my career, and I just found it easy to get on with the kids.
Yeah. And, and to get into that then, when it comes to your work as getting specifically into crimes involving children, like were you approached to investigate crimes of that nature, or was it a particular area that you wanted to work in?
I never wanted to work in it. I mean, because I went home to 4 young boys, and the last thing I wanted to do was deal with kids at work. And it was always back then seen, and it's going to sound really sexist, but it was seen child protection work was seen as a woman's job, and it was a lot of women that were sort of coming back from maternity leave were put in that post. But the very bizarre thing about it, the ironic thing about it, was that by the time I come to leave the police, I found, and I stand by this testimony to this day, that is the most important part of police work. The children, if you damage the children, you damage society. And money is spent on so many other sort of areas of policing, and really all they're doing is chasing their tail, because you're just picking up the pieces, really, of what has shattered child's lives. And yet, when it comes to child abuse investigations, it is massively under-resourced, it's understaffed, and the people that are brave enough to go into that, of the most important area of sort of policing, are grossly overworked, and the stress levels and the impacted nature of it are through the roof. But no, in answer to that, no, I never ever wanted to go into that line of investigating. I wanted to go on something like the Flying Squad or the Regional Crime Squad, something big and sexy like that. But
more glamorous.
Yeah, and there was no glamour in that. But it was just, I was asked one day by a detective sergeant, and he said, "Look, we're getting information coming from the prison system, that paedophiles are sort of getting away without registering, because they just brought in the Sex Offenders Registry Act at that time. They're getting away with it by living on canal boats. Do you want to look into it?" And I went, "Okay." He said, "Look, you work on your own, total freedom. Do what you got to do, but just get us results." And I looked into it, and it was like really lifting a rock, and the underbelly, this activity that was going on in plain sight, but really sort of out of the sort of mindset of normal people, was just absolutely incredulous. It really took some believing, and then that's when I really sort of got into dealing with paedophiles and what a deviant and don't want to give them any credence, but intelligent bunch. You know, because in order for that sort of level of deviancy and deception and grooming, there is a high level of intelligence that goes with it. And on an intelligent level, you know, you've got to be careful when you interview these people that they won't outwit you, because they are very thoughtful about what they do. But on an emotional level, you know, they're incredibly stunted people.
Yeah.
So it was totally changing your mindset of how you deal with it. And it was very, very revealing. But not only because I've never dealt with that sort of level of criminality before and that sort of deviant nature, but also what shocked me was the police's attitude when you do become successful in investigating it. And that was something I just wasn't equally as prepared for.
Yeah. And then, you know, without actually talking about particular cases, like what kinds of crimes, you mentioned paedophilia, but I mean, how would you categorize them? You got paedophilia, trafficking, and what else? Are they all interconnected as well?
I mean, trafficking is more of an en vogue term, but it was strange how they would gauge it back then, because what I found is that when it comes to criminality, you get like drug trafficking, and people associate that with, you know, the big drug lords and the mafias moving these drugs about, making billions and billions. But what totally surpasses that is the trade in children. Mm-hmm. And the attitude that the British are very good at looking down on the rest of the world. You know, they've still got this imperialistic view of themselves, and especially when it comes to Scotland Yard being sort of like the benchmark of policing excellence throughout the world. Mm-hmm. And with that becomes a failure really to negotiate with your foreign counterparts, you know, like Europol and things like that. And children have been passed around from country to country, from kids home to kids home, you know, I think really since these places were first established. And I can always remember asking a member of what we called CEOP, which was part of the National Crime Squad, for help in the problems that we had with kids being sort of pimped out, to use a term, from children's homes. And he said, it's, you know, really, there's not a lot I can do to help. And what was incredible was that from where his office was, you could see a block of flats where I knew kids were taken to this housing estate, and they were being pimped out to a barrister in the family courts. And I could see it from this fellow's office. And he said, no, sorry, we can't help. But then, you know, it was a short time afterwards, there was a TV program about child trafficking out in Cambodia. And this guy had been flown out to sort of preach to the Cambodians, you know, how they should be policing their child trafficking problems. Yet he had no interest in helping what was on his doorstep. So what I'm saying, in essence, is that let's not go looking that this is a problem that sort of only affects the third world and poverty causes this. This is happening on our doorsteps. This has been happening in our children's homes for decade after decade after decade. And it probably goes back a good century, you know. So it was a huge, huge problem. But because it had never really been properly looked at, it never been properly assessed, it gone on really with impunity.
You mentioned the kids' homes there. You know, when we look at the victims of abuse and trafficking and all of that stuff, you know, are there any typical patterns here in terms of their background? You know,
yeah, there is. The kids that end up in the children's homes usually come from, you know, a broken family. You know, there's an inability to parent properly, and the kids end up in the care system. So they tend to come from the lower and the working classes, not wholly, but on the whole they do. You know, once they're in care, if they've got dysfunctional parents or absent parents, no one's really going to come looking for these kids. Mm-hmm. So they're basically, their parent becomes the state, or indirectly it's the state, but more directly it'll be the staff in the children's homes. You know, and then these kids aren't given the love, the care and the protection that the state promises to afford them. In fact, what happens are they then become part of this vile machine which just traffics them, which pimps them out, which uses them as prostitutes. And it really was, when I looked into it, the kids' homes I looked at, it was unanimous. It was just going on in every single kids' home. And there was a lot of money to be made. You know, that's one thing that we can't overlook, is the money that's been made. And the money's made on various levels. Initially, it's made by the punter, the person who pays for the sexual services of that child, because they have to be provided. So there'll be people that either work in these homes, not necessarily, or it might be the fact that it is people that have groomed these children, and then they then pick these kids up and take them out. Mm-hmm. And then we've got to look at the fact that these children's homes, these looked after kids in their placements, they're being paid, these people, they're being paid big money. You know, some of the homes I was looking at, you know, they were being paid £2,000 per week per child. Mm-hmm. So there's money to be made there. And then we got to look at the bigger picture. We got to look at the family courts, how much money is made in the family courts. Now, barristers, anyone who's hired the service of a barrister, they ain't cheap. You know, they can quite boldly put an invoice in for £400 an hour.
Yeah.
You know, so there's, I mean, ridiculous fees that they charge. And then we got to look at the tab that society picks up in general. Because once a child has been put through this horrendous system, then you've got dysfunctionality, you've got anger, you've got mental health problems, you've got drug addiction, you know, you've got alcoholism, you know, and then you've got kids that end up as offenders because they get caught in the criminal justice system and they bounce around in it really until the day they die, unless the circle's broken. So then these kids become recidivist offenders. You know, they become prominent nominals in crime, costing society in general a lot more money. And then do they then stop, or do they then go on to have kids, which then there might be another level of dysfunctionality that goes with it, which continues. So it's like a cancer that just infects everything it comes in contact with.
Yeah.
So when society is saying we're getting tough on drugs, we're getting tough on this, you never say we're getting tough on child abuse, we're getting tough on child prostitution, we're getting tough on child trafficking. But that is the core, that's the epicenter, that is where it begins.
Yeah. And
they don't want to look there. And then when there are people like myself, now I'm not claiming, you know, to top trumps anyone on this or the monopoly on being bullied, but when there's people like me that are brave enough to stand up and say, hang on, what the hell's going on here? We are crushed. We are absolutely crushed by the system, and we are crushed deliberately. You know, it is for a reason, and those that instigate the punishment against us, they know exactly what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, and that's the how they treat whistleblowers as evidence that this is a large apparatus at work here. You know how the general public, well, some do anyway, certainly before the age of the internet, a lot of people would see child abuse and all child trafficking and child prostitution and paedophilia as being, you know, so the acts of lonely soul weirdos or some paedophile priest, you know. So I think it's fair to say we can put that old perception in the bin, can't we?
Of course, and it's like changing the public perception of a paedophile. I mean, we used to joke about it and said what they want to do is point the finger and say it's the weird fella with the big milk bottom glasses who lives with his mum, you know, and a strange bloke lives down the road. It's not.
You're wearing the raincoat kind of thing.
Yeah, that sort of one. But it isn't. I mean, you know, we had some of the cases I dealt with. There were young lads, we called them Romeos. These were lads, there was a gang of them at the time. I'm not picking on any race, but these were Kosovan lads who were preying on the young girls. And, you know, some of these were young, good-looking lads that their job is to befriend these girls, you know, tell them they love them, everything else, and then just coerce them into prostitution. You know, there was women involved, you know, and one of the things we found that the women that were involved, their deviancy far surpassed that of men.
Wow.
But, you know, and so some people just going, well, women don't do it. Well, it's a nonsense. Paedophiles, you know, a few of the interviews I've done, I've had people say to me, it's this person, or it's the Freemasons, or it's whatever. I said, no, it's not. The only secret society you need to be careful of here are the paedophiles, the most well-organised, diverse secret society there is, because by sheer nature of what they're up to, it's kept a secret. They don't go mouthing off about it, and they don't tend to do it in public. And they come from every single walk of life. They come from every racial background, every religious connotation, and every single gender. So it's across the board.
Right, and that's interesting because it does fly in the face of that perception we were talking about. It's both men and women, a variety of backgrounds, and they're their own little kind of cult, if you will. And and then to get into the psychology side of it, what is it about these offenders that makes them interested in those messed up things? Is it purely a sexual thing or a dominance thing, or is there more to it than that, Jon?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get both of them elements, and but the other thing is, what we found is that they do it because they enjoy it, right? And you've got some that said, that the people were involved in Satanism. Yes, it goes on within that realm, but that's not that they can rely on duress to say it was a cover, maybe do it, whatever. These people do it because they enjoy it. Now, there's a high percentage of those that do commit these horrific offences that themselves have endured same treatment when they were younger. Yes, that is a large percentage of them do that. That's not saying that people that have been abused go on to abuse, because that's not the case, although there is a percentage that do. Mm-hmm. But these people choose to do it. They derive pleasure from it. And then you can go into like the profiling element, which, I mean, I have had a good insight into that. I was very privileged in my time in police to be one of the very few officers that actually did get sex offender profiling training. Mm-hmm. Not enough. However, since then I have worked, closely with profilers, and more recently with one of the top profilers in the world, and also someone who works for the NHS who does it. So very, very privileged to work amongst them. And it's very revealing what they come out with. And, there's different personalities, and different categories of offenders. But the main thing is they do it because they enjoy it.
Right. And that profiling stuff is obviously key, because it's all about the psychology end of it, and understanding the workings of the mind of the offenders. And do any of them, from those of the offenders you've dealt with, Jon, do any of them show like remorse, or are they just oblivious to the damage they've done?
On the whole, no, a very arrogant bunch. But there are those that do. I mean, there is the argument, do we plough money into treatment? Now, they found that a prolific paedophile can create over 110 victims in a lifetime, and out of the people that are abused, out of 100, 10 to 15% will go on to abuse themselves. So, within one generation, one person can create hundreds and hundreds of victims. So there is an argument, the fact that there should be a treatment program, strictly to prevent victims, being made. But the other thing is, what you've got to look at is that the people that paedophiles that do commit these crimes, that themselves have been victims, right? At the moment they commit a crime, they're not a victim. They're a perpetrator. Mm-hmm. They're a defendant, right? They're a criminal, and they're a pervert. Yeah. So, and that's how they should be treated. Now, if they then want to come forward, admit to what they've done, and then make some reparation for what they've done, and then assist the police in catching others, because who better to catch a pedo than a pedo? Yeah. Because they will know the mindset. Again, it's like police informants. Police informants come, 99.9% of police informants come from the criminal classes. Yeah. And I used to get people say to me, I was in a pub once and they said, we don't like coppers in here. We deal with all our own problems. And I thought, you lot have no idea what you're saying, because the criminals I dealt with, so many of them were informants. For one reason or another, they grasp, and that's what happens. There's some that will never grasp, but there's a lot that do, because it's a selfish lifestyle, and grass is a selfish people. They want to get themselves out of trouble. Now, if you get a paedophile, and again, I'd have people saying, I couldn't keep my hands off him, I'd have to beat him up. And, well, if you beat one up, he's not going to talk to you. But if you get one talking to you, you're going to get information that can catch more. Now, I'm not saying, bend over backwards for them, but what I'm saying is treat everyone reasonably and fairly, and then you'll secure a conviction, which is what you're after. Get these people locked up, but also get some information that can help you catch another paedophile, because they will be part of an organisation. Like I said, the ultimate secret society. They will know other paedophiles, less than or hopefully worse than them, that you can go and catch. So very, very organised. And like I said earlier on, very deviant crime, and at times very patient criminals. There'll be a target age that person has a preference to, and there have been cases of sex offenders moving in with a young mum or whatever, and waiting and incubating their desire until the child that woman's got is at the age that they prefer, that they've got a liking to. Wow. And they will wait a long time. So again, very, very patient, but yet devious criminals. And I mentioned it before, especially in our society, we have a broken society. I was a single parent. My kids are grown up now. They're adults. They're not children anymore. But my children, were vulnerable while I was a single parent. They were young. And we have a lot of single parenting in this country. And the single parents, their kids are prey for these people, and they do target the single parents, and they do target the kids in the care homes because of the vulnerability.
Yeah, that explains why, that kind of policing probably needs that deft touch like you were talking about, because the level of intelligence, they've no conscience, but they've a high level of intelligence, and you need to be as careful yourself to try to, weed them out or try and get some convictions.
I mean, that's the ultimate thing. And, conviction works on two levels. Firstly, it's justice. We've got a pedo, he's in prison, he ain't going to hurt another kid while he's in there. And secondly, it sends a clear message to the victim that we're here to help you. And what better way for healing to start than for the victim to see justice, Right. And then if the person wants to then come on board, admit to what they've done, and then help put things right, help put society right, then good, we're all on board with it. But if not, then tough. It's their loss. But we are so far behind in this country in dealing with this level of criminality, and we are appalling at recognising its importance. Now, that can be argued that is done deliberately, because what we're seeing, especially when people like myself speak out, the attack. Now, we're doing good for public. I like to think I served the public far and beyond my call of duty in doing what I did. Mm-hmm. I stood alone when I stood up. People I thought were strong, brave colleagues, not one of them stood by me. Not one single person. I've got good coppers that are still friends with me and help me, but they weren't involved in what I was doing. But those that were, they will run for the hills. And I think they've let everyone down, them people. They have not stuck to their oath in acting without fear or favour. Mm-hmm. And then you've got to look at why is that happening? And I think this country's a clever country. It does everything for a damn good reason. And I think that the way it deals with sex offenders, the leniency shown towards them, the way it doesn't police this criminality properly, and the way it attacks those who expose it, I think that's on purpose. I fail to see that that's just an oversight. They've been warned all since when I was in the police. There was stories coming out about people exposing prominent politicians and actors and things like that. It's been in the media a lot, yet nothing's done. and his stories were always coming out. And I just think I failed to accept that it's an oversight. It's done deliberately.
Yeah, I agree. It's too big it's too big and successful of a machine for it to just be an accident that's just people can't control. You know,
it's money and power. I mean, you make big money from these children, right? So they're sold as sex slaves, really, for whatever period of time that person wants to pay. On top of that, videos are made, photographs are made.
Yeah.
Now the internet, that's just an unstoppable machine. I mean, back pre-internet days, one guy, who'd been one of the detectives on the paedophile unit since its inception, he told me that, a child porn magazine, and I'll say a high grade one because it's an abhorrent term for that, but a very explicit one would fetch the same amount of money as a brand new small saloon car.
Oh my God!
So we're talking thousands of pounds that they were worth. But more sinister than that was the involvement of certain types of organised criminality, and kids could be sold to parties at a price depending on whether the kid is returned or it isn't returned. And that's one thing I was told. And you can only draw an inference what that means if they're not returned, And there was one guy I had, one informant, who was a rent boy. He was a male child prostitute, and he was taken to a place. He was a young kid. I think he was actually in his early teens at the time. But he'd been sexually abused, from very early on and passed around in the children's homes. But he ended up on the streets of London, Piccadilly, which is termed the meat rack, and taken to a very wealthy home in a white Rolls Royce by two men to the Hampstead area of London, and then subjected to 2 days of torture in which the people doing to him actually genuinely believed he had died. And the damage to his lower intestines and his colon was so bad that, he was going to die, but he did survive, but there was irreparable damage done. So he was sexually tortured. So, and this is not an isolated experience. Some of these people are very, very sadistic.
Of course, I know you were based in London with the Met. And would you say London, is that the major kind of hotspot for activity like that in the UK?
Yeah, well, what I would say about London, and there's a couple of points I want to raise here, is that London is one of the largest cities in Western Europe. There was a time, at the turn of last century, it was the largest city in the world. I mean, it's got a population just shy of 11 million people. There's poverty in London. There's dysfunctionality, and there's a lot of children's homes. And there's one London borough, the London borough of Haringey, which covers some of the poorest parts of London, that's got more children's home than any other local authority in the country. So it's huge. Every case I dealt with at the time, it did spiral out into the home counties, but it was mainly confined to London. It started off in central London, and it was just spreading all over and very, very well established. But yet, what is very surprising is that when we hear about it, you've got this new term, grooming gangs. Well, anyone who sort of coerces a child into that sort of criminality is grooming them. But grooming gangs, what are we hearing about? We're hearing about provincial towns, towns in the far northeast, the northwest, Leeds, Luton, Aylesbury, Swindon, Rotherham, Rochdale. We're not hearing one case from London, not one case coming out of London. And I think I got a good idea why it is, because I spoke out about it. I was one of a couple of officers that were dedicated to deal with child prostitution, which is huge, and they shut us down when I spoke out. And that was in, 2005, 2006. So since then, there is now, just post Jimmy Savile, they started putting dedicated teams on. But for many years, a good 7 years, they didn't have any dedicated officers dealing with it. And that's appalling. That's letting the public down monumentally, that is.
Yeah, especially with the seriousness of crimes against children and the consequences of that when nothing's done about it, going forward for society. And, well then, in terms of, say, the so-called, gangs or network in the UK for paedophilia, was there any sort of connections with other groups or places outside of the UK?
Yeah. I mean, what happens is children get put in placements, right? They get moved out. They get taken out of London and they get sent elsewhere. Now, they just get preyed on. We had one girl was moved out of London to Hereford. She was one of the youngest children I dealt with. She was being pimped out at the age of 9 years old. Now, what I've got to say something here is that I'm using terms like child prostitute, pimping out. There's people that get very offended by me saying that. Listen, it's only a term. It's the actions that count here. I was in the police for many years, and that's how we was on the child prostitution unit. So that's how they termed it. It's ingrained into me, and there are new on vogue terms like victim of child rape and all that. That's okay. I hope I don't offend anyone. And what you've got to understand, my standpoint, I'm coming from a point that I stood up against this and I fight tirelessly, money all out my own pocket to put an end to this. So if anyone deems any negative connotations by my wording, it's my actions you should take into account, not my wording. And I've got to a point where I'm actually, if you get offended, then I'm sorry about that, but I'm not going to apologise for saying what I say. It's my actions that matter here. Now, these kids would get moved. And one girl, 9 years old, she got moved, I don't know, she was in about 12, 13. She got moved to Hereford, little town in, sort of by the Welsh border. And within a matter of weeks, she was preyed upon there. So these people are waiting for them. There was one girl got moved to a secure unit in Cambridgeshire, and I went up to visit her, and she said, John, all the girls in here, they're from all over the country, and they're all involved in the same as me, the prostitution, and all they're doing is talking about how they're going to go back into it when they leave. And she said the other thing is they're getting the other girls that aren't involved in it, they're getting them involved in it. And we found that in the kids' homes as well, that the pimps, the groomers, the Romeos, whatever you term them, they would have their girls in these children's homes, but they'll get these girls to encourage their friends and the other children in the care homes to get involved in it. And one case we had was one girl, she was encouraging her friend to make an allegation against her mum, so she would get put in a kids' home, and then her mum had no jurisdiction over her and she could start working as a prostitute.
Oh, my God.
And it was just absolutely incredible. And the one thing, social services knew about all this. The police knew about all this. So when we get the commissioners and the chief constable saying, we've learnt mistakes and all that, this is absolute crap because they all knew. They all knew and they chose to ignore it. I remember one night, picking up a 14-year-old girl from the red light area who was soliciting. She was actively looking for punters at the age of 14. And I picked her up as a victim, as rightly so, and was told to get rid of her because she had scabies and would infect the car. And so this was the attitude. It's well organised. And when these kids are moved, when their files go with them, and the people who read these files, there's some of them are involved in it. They know exactly what they're getting. They know if a kid has been abused before, and they'll be the ones that we target because all the grooming's already done. And these predators, it's like a fellow who likes women. He's going to go to where the women are. He's going to go to the busy pubs and the nightclubs. And it's the same as these people. They're going to go where their children are. And they're going to get themselves working within the family courts, within the children's homes, the benevolent things, so-called, like the scouts, with like whatever, the Boys Brigade, or whatever they might be. And I'm not putting a slur on them organisations, but they have become a prey and infiltrated by these people, and that is a fact. So they're everywhere. And, you know, we found that some of the larger children's homes that they had back in the 60s, 70s and the 80s, you know, there's one of them in South London that had 19 paedophiles at one time working there. Known paedophiles, 19 of them. You know, you can't tell me that that's not organised criminality.
It's incredible.
It is incredibly well organised. It is the biggest form of trafficking we've got. You can put guns beneath it and you can put drugs beneath it. Children is a number one. And the other point I want to make here is the blackmail value of a child, right? Now, a child is not the one who instigates the blackmail, but the child is the bait for the blackmail. Now,
I see.
A little while back, yeah, you had an MP who's now deceased called Paddy Ashdown. I'm not saying he's involved, but what he was nicknamed Paddy Pants Down because of his, you know, adulterous behaviour. He was always sort of shagging around, as it were. And it was laughed at in the media. Oh, he's a bit of a boy, a bit of a character. So that sort of behaviour is accepted. And it's even at some points it's sort of glamorised, right? And, you know, recently things have changed in society. And before, people were frightened of being outed as homosexual because it would destroy their careers. You had it with George Michael, the singer, and things like that. You know, but now it ain't a problem. Society has moved on from all that, and that's a lot more socially acceptable than it was before. But still taboo is child abuse. Now, if someone is abusing a child, you have got a lever over that person for eternity. For the time being, that's never going to be socially acceptable. I know that, you know, there are things saying that they're trying to sort of normalise it and all that, but it's still very much used as a blackmail tool. Whereas having an affair, you know, people go, well, so what? Grass me up, I lose my marriage, but so what? You know, so what? I'm gay, so what? But the child abuse got strong blackmail value, and I got that from a good source. And I said one day about information that is kept on public record and on the National Archives that is detrimental to the political stability of this country. And I said to this guy, if it's that dangerous and that toxic, why do they keep it? And he said, one reason, John, it's got horrendous blackmail value.
Right.
And it has. So if you've got a politician that has been, you know, assaulting children, as we've had quite a few cases sort of come forward and rumours of others come forward, you know, that person's open for blackmail. And I'm going to quantify that a little bit deeper in that when I was in the police, I applied for a job and I did get it. I never took up the post of it, though, but I did get this job, and it was dealing with top secret information. And I had to be vetted to the highest level. And in the vetting, they need to know everything about you. They need to know about your family, your financial status, but they also want to know about your sexual history. And we had a briefing beforehand, and they said you weren't allowed on any social media, Facebook, Twitter, or any of that. You weren't allowed on it. And they said anyone who's involved in dating sites, things like swinging, dogging, you're to tell us because there's a good chance we will find out. And if we do, then it's a discipline offence and you won't get the job anyway.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things a fella said, he said, and a lot of people that don't actually pass this level of vetting are homosexuals. He said, this isn't a homophobic thing. It's just a reality that there's more sexual partners and more chance of you being compromised.
Oh, I see.
You know, and he was up front with it. Not my words, it was what I was told. And so it will go against you. You know, so if that is the case, if you're dealing with that sort of level of secrecy within the police and you're dealing with these very high positions, you have to have that vetting. How comes that the politicians don't get vetted to that level?
Exactly.
And if they can be compromised, and you know, it just it defies any logic. But then again, the reason being on a common sense front that because they can then be used as a puppet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why there's that double standard there. And, we did bring up the man himself, Jimmy Savile, probably one of the high profile cases. And I mean, I was going to ask you, how high do you think it goes? Because when you look at Jimmy Savile, he was hanging around with the royal family quite a bit, Prince Philip.
I've got to be careful what I say now, because some of this was told to me in confidence by someone in the know. Mm-hmm. And it was to do with a child abductor and murderer that was very, very notorious and active in Europe, in Northern Europe. And the man went to trial, and the man was abducting children for sex parties in which many children died. And it had implications to that country's royal family, and it also sort of the fingers pointed at people very high up, CEOs of businesses around there. But one of the people that was involved was a cardinal for that country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I was told that, and then it was verified by someone else. Said, yeah, we did hear that. So I won't say any more than that, because it's just, I don't want the person who told me this to get in any trouble. But from a very, very credible source. So we're talking, and this cardinal, what they all do, they all go in the line for the papacy. So that's on a religious level, that's how up it went, and. We saw Jimmy Savile in his connections, and Jimmy Savile was known about. The police knew about him, and those that worked with him knew about him as well. So it's, you can't tell me that those high up, those that he was sort of hanging around with, didn't know, because of course they know. But yeah, I would say, hand on heart, with a lot of confidence, it goes to the highest level you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
But then that's a difficulty, like with me, I was a crown servant, and I spoke out, and I was bullied, and who am I to turn to? Do I write to the Queen and say, come and help me? And, it would be pointless. So I'll tell you what's quite strange about it, that there was a very brave chief constable who stood up against the cover-ups, and he's the one, Mike Veal, who spoke out against Ted Heath, and how Ted Heath, investigated him and said, had he been alive today, he would be facing a trial.
Oh, was this Mike Veal, wasn't it?
Mike Veal, yeah. And I said to him, Mike, my bullying comes from your level, ACPO level, the Association of Chief Police Officers. They colluded together for an attack to bring me down, and they did. And I said, so you were of that level, who the hell bullied you? And he went, it came from higher up, it came from the House of Lords, and it came from MI5.
Wow.
And then the question then gets asked, why? Why would anyone in the name of humanity, in the name of Jesus Christ, want to cover this up? Mm. And there's only one reason, and it has to be a nefarious one.
Yeah, it's in their interests to do so. They clearly want to. It seems to me like they want it to continue. They don't want paedophiles or paedophilia to disappear, but they want to hide the fact that they feel that way about it.
Yeah, and it's just amazing, that the public disinterest in this. Now, the work I've been doing recently via social media, because there has been an absence from the national media, they just don't want to know. But social media, my work has just been spread far and wide, and people are now coming up to me in the street and saying, look, I've seen you on YouTube, I've seen you on Facebook, keep going, God bless you, keep going. And I would say 99.9% of the comments I get are just so supportive and heartwarming, but I mean, it's crushing me because there's just so much of it coming out. They're encouraging me to keep going, but I'm just one person. I just wish more would come forward, and that have been in the police, that have been in the social services, the NHS, and start speaking out. But it's so difficult to do them because they just get destroyed. And I can't blame them for keeping silence. It's not something I would have done. I understand they've got mortgages to pay and they've got families to look out for. And some people, they just aren't strong enough to take what's coming their way. And what comes your way, anyone who's been through it like I have, it is just debilitating. It is just totally and utterly destructive, and it's evil. And the thing is, these high-ranked officers, which was in my case, they sanctioned this. The commissioner of the police, both of them, both he and she, the one now and the predecessor, they knew what I was going through, yet they did nothing. In fact, the attack on me just increased. And we should be, as a public, as a fee-paying public, who pay a lot of money to be policed, we should be asking questions at the highest level. How was this allowed to go on?
Yeah.
And sometimes people aren't strong enough and they commit suicide. It's too much for them. And they know that the police's biggest fear is going in prison. So that's why they start implementing discipline and criminal proceedings against you the moment you speak out.
Yeah, because you're up against the government, whoever's pulling the strings, the media, and then the police and all the different kind of tentacles of the state. Well,
I was in a meeting. It was meant to be with a Home Secretary, and it got delegated down to the Under Secretary, which was Nicholas Hurd, who's a Minister for Policing and Crime. And at the meeting, we had representatives from the Home Office there, and we had investigators from the Home Office there, and we had the former Policing and Crime Minister, Sir Mike Penning. And Sir Mike Penning, he came forward and stood by my side when I first came forward and stood up. And he turned around and he said to Nicholas Hurd, he said, "Nick, you know what they did to me when I stood by Jon Wedger. They removed me from my post just because I stood by this man." And then he turned around and said, "I don't think Jon Wedger would be sitting in this room today had I not stood by him." And he said, "You can draw any inference you want from that comment." And I looked at him and he just looked at me and nodded. And I said, "Is that true?" He went, "100% true, John." I mean, I'm only inferring that, that my placement on this earth was tenable at that point had he not come forward. And, if that is the case, how shocking is that? And yet the public don't give a toss. We stand outside the first Wednesday of every month outside Parliament at midday, and we politely and respectfully campaign, and people just walk by and say, "Don't give a toss." They really are not concerned one bit. But like I've said many times, there was a case, that woman who threw a cat in a bin, and the whole of the UK was in uproar. It was on every newspaper. It was everywhere. This woman had to be moved house. There was programmes about her. She chucked a cat in a wheelie bin, and that was her crime. And everyone was concerned. The world stopped that moment. Yet you take a kid out of a care home, you beat it, you rape it, you then sell that child, and no one gives a toss. And what have we become? That is a damning indictment of what we become as a society, and it's shocking.
Yeah, exactly. The priorities are way all over the shop here. And with whistleblowers themselves, in the police circles in the UK, are there many others, or have you got many connections with other whistleblowers?
Yeah, there are. Everyone tells such a similar story. They do. In more recent years, the last couple of years, there's no one really come forward. But go back about 5 years, there is a small cadre of us that have all sort of got together and have spoke out as a collective, but not many at all. There's people that come forward and say, "Yeah, I remember that going on when I was on Vice or when I was on this," but really that's not good enough. You get paid a good wage, and back then it was a good life. You got housed, you got fed, you get clothed, you got watered, you got your medical, your dental, everything paid for. So you had loyalty to do the right thing. Now they're not paid as much, and life for a copper now is quite appalling. It's not what it once was. So I can sort of understand it in more recent years, people sort of not being asked to, but back then they should have done more, but they didn't. But yeah, they do come forward, but they get punished, and they get punished severely. Now, there's a lot of the public that don't like the police, and I get that, because how I stand now, I'm not keen on them either because of what they tried to do to me. Not just on one occasion, but many, many occasions, and some of it was particularly vicious. But the majority of people now that I link in with have come from, and again, I don't want this to sound derogatory, the criminal classes, you know, and my best friend in this now has been in every institution, you know, penal system, as it were, that you can imagine. And he's my best pal now. And, you know, we work closely together, and we don't have crosswords or anything, because we're working for the same cause. We're working to stop this. And victims and survivors of this horrendous crime, they want justice, but they'll never get justice if those that know about all this, i.e. the police, are silenced. Now, one of the arguments when I was in front of the ministers at the beginning of the year was that someone from the Home Office said, but there's legislation to protect whistleblowers. I said, yes, there might be. But there's legislations that said we shouldn't be having sex with children, but people still do. It's a flawed argument.
Yeah.
But police officers are not subject to employment law. We have no union. MPs don't intervene when this injustice is going on. So these senior officers, these chief constables and commissioners, they act with total impunity, and people are powerless to intervene. And that is what I want to stop. There has to be some regulatory body that can step in and say, oi, enough, you're publicly accountable. This is wrong. This is a crime against humanity. This ain't happening. And I said to the ministers, I said, I'm telling you now, right, that this will one day be a national disgrace. Do not get caught up in the cover-up of this. And it just went quiet. And but the majority of people are behind me. And someone said, you're a brave man. And I said, well, hang on a second. I only did what I was paid to do, right? To act without fear or without favour. Now, probably my moral compass was a bit more finely tuned because I was, a young lad at the time, and I had 4 young children to bring up. So I understood the tenability of the placement of my kids. I got that. But my fear blends into insignificance compared to that of a frightened little child in a kid's home, while some monster's walking towards them, and that's why I done it. And it's a worse form of bullying. And there was something that a victim said to me, and it struck a major chord. And they're saying that schools are now implementing this sort of anti-child abuse teaching to kids, and they're saying we're teaching them to say no to strangers. Right now, 2 things here: it's not a child's job to say no. Right, it's a kid can't consent to this, So why should a child say no to anything? People shouldn't be doing it. Full stop. And secondly, 80 to 85% of all abuse it goes on within the family. So goes on within the family. So why aren't they teaching that? But they're not. They're just going on that it's some sort of stranger. And it's a bit like, stranger rapes. They account for 2% of all rapes.
Exactly, yeah.
Things like that. So, they've got all this upside down. They statistically got it all twisted, and it's they're still avoiding the truth. In one hand, they're saying they're addressing it, and actually what they're doing is pretty much next to sod all.
Like they're putting these shitty plasters and hoping it's just going to all work out.
Oh, if we was to look at society in general, and what has caused our society to crumble, child abuse will be the number one factor in it. Yeah, it is the area of policing which they put no attention in, they put no training in, they put no money in it, and the poor souls that do it, you know, they're traumatised. You know, I can remember I was on one team. There was 2 teams. There was 5 detectives on each team, and I went in one day, and there was 3 other detectives in. One bloke just sat there with his head in his hands, and there was another woman. She had her arms crossed, and she was laying on her desk with her head on the desk, just crying. And they just both had breakdowns, you know. And we were all functioning alcoholics, you know, because there was just no respite. You know, we were all heavily traumatised by the work, and we just carried on because we were all good people doing the right thing. But when you went home, you couldn't share these stories with anyone. You had no one to talk to. It was too horrific to mention. So what you'd do is you'd self-medicate, and the main way of doing that is just through alcohol. Yeah, there was other areas I worked in. You know, we was given expense accounts. We was getting cars to take home. We had unlimited overtime, spare time, you know, and it was nonsense crime, really. But you know, this is just where the attention goes, and it's going in the wrong place, and this needs addressing.
As we come towards the end here, Jon, you mentioned like having a regulatory body. You know, what other kind of solutions do you think we need here going forward to sort this out?
I mean, people need to be educated as to the full scale of the problem. You know, the public needs to be concerned about this. There needs to be an outrage as to what's going on. The ministers, the MPs need to be working in our favour, not ignoring this. The other thing is our religious institutions. The church is incredibly silent on this. You know, I wrote to Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the head of the Church of England, the Catholic Church for the UK, right? Initially, he refused to get in touch with me, and then he did. And he turned around and said, well, I'm powerless to intervene with the police matter. And I turned around and said back to him, but, you know, you intervene with the Madeleine McCann case. Why not this? I've got a meeting hopefully coming up with the Archbishop, you know, for the Church of England, and asking them what they're going to do. You know, they're our spiritual leaders. They should be doing something about this, because child abuse destroys the spirit. It destroys a child's spirits, and yet they're doing nothing. So, you know, we all need to play our own part in this. We need to stand by people like myself. The national media needs to get on board with this, but they're not. And it's, you know, I haven't got the solutions. I think we need a day of protest on this. I think all those that have been affected by child abuse should come together in central London and all have our voices heard. But people just can't be bothered. You know, can't be bothered. It just doesn't, you know, click up on their radar, unfortunately.
Yeah, there needs to be more care for things to change. But, you know, it's been great hearing your thoughts on this, Jon. It's a very serious and dark subject, but it needs to be talked about. It's incredibly important. And, you know, I know you hear this a lot. I mean, I have to say this, though. You know, you have my respect. I think you're very courageous. And, you know, I know you hear it a lot, but, you know, also, you know, I think doing the right thing in the face of evil is always courageous, but especially coming from your background and the situation you're in, it's even harder. You know, it takes even more guts, kind of.
Yeah, it's not be frightened. We're fighting evil. Anyone who perpetuates this crime against a child is evil. And it is a spiritual war, whichever way you look at it. It's good doing what is right, and it's evil trying to get away with whatever they can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's well said. It's a good way to sum it up. Well, Jon, thanks very much for your time. I hope you continue to do your work, and, you know, all the best for the future and all your future plans.
God bless you. Thank you ever so much for giving me this platform.
This is Resolving Reality Radio. Thank you so much for listening. That was my interview with Jon Wedger, former Metropolitan Police and Scotland Yard detective turned whistleblower. Visit the website jonwedgerfoundation.org. That's JONWEDGER foundation.org for all of Jon's information, social media links, YouTube channel, and interviews.
You are listening to Resolving Reality Radio, the podcast for Ireland's new independent media website, resolvingreality.com.